All right, so we are recording. How you doing?
I'm just fine. How are you?
I'm doing good, and everything's good it's good to finally get the interview with you and everything. I'm not too far. I've been to Philly many times. Usually go in the spring though, and everything. So let's see. So start off with, I guess, if you want to introduce yourself.
All right. Hello, everyone. Deterlucem here, and I am, I guess you'd call like a YouTube, Facebook atheist. I do a lot of shows and a lot of projects that have to do with debunking what I see as gross misuses of science and logic. I go after a lot of the semi-popular apologists to kind of address their points because they're reflective of the larger scope of what a lot of people do. Like they make a lot of the same arguments, and a lot of people copy their arguments. So I think it's useful to address them. I am a 24-year-old college student. I've been at school for about 6 years because I keep switching majors, and I work out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm not going to go any more detail than that, but I don't know. I enjoy myself. I like being in the YouTube scene,
Yeah, it's
and this
fun.
is a long time coming, but I'm very glad to be in this interview.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's great to finally get you. So what is your story? Like, did you grow up in a religious family? When did you start to debate? When did you start to think about the topic?
It's kind of interesting. Like, you could do the classic quip where it's like, oh, I was born an atheist, so why would I ever shift from that? My parents evidently are and were rather religious,
Oh, really?
but they never brought it up.
Really? They never brought it
So
up.
they never wanted to force it on their kids. They wanted their kids to come to their own conclusions. Which I have now that I know that, I have to go like, good job, parents. That's exactly what you should do.
Yeah, that's unique actually.
It's, they were like even now. I would say that my dad is like a very very moderate Christian. Like his church, they do gay ceremonies. Some of their best friends are like just as a classic. Like they're not fundamentalist. So either way, they're very much more about like actual action rather than the super rigidness of the dogma. Which makes sense. If you're about the rigidness of the dogma, you'd probably force it on your children.
um, is your atheism caused by like basically what causes your atheism? Is it specifically a lack of a belief in biblical stories? Is it a lack of a belief in the religions that have been claimed, or is it lack of scientific evidence, or all of the above?
Like a little bit of all of them. Like you say biblical, but there are a lot more gods than just biblical.
Right,
And all of them to me have just about the same amount of supporting evidence, which is basically on par with hearsay.
right, right. Yeah.
Which which is like I understand why people would believe in the stories. They have a lot of emotional pull. They work off of desires a lot of people have, but I never found them convincing because I tend to need some kind of verifiable evidence that I'm able to check to make sure it's not just me tricking myself. Because in my childhood, I totally, like, my brother and my dad wouldn't even let me read some fantasy books because they knew that I was the kind of person who would think that they were true, ironically enough. So, like, I understand the idea of being convinced in something being true for pretty bad reasons. So that's, I guess maybe that's why I started heavily getting into logic and science and those sort of things. But I just never found any of the claims convincing anymore.
Yeah, see, my thing is, for probably the first 25 years of my life, I went to church, and like a lot of religious people, like I knew that God existed. I didn't really think about it. God's there. I wasn't intolerant to others, but I just knew that God existed. And then I kind of came across some people who were telling me, you're praying the wrong way, and God really wants you to do this, and you're going to get punished. And it's probably silly to look back on it now, but there was a time where I took that seriously, and I said, gee, I should probably pray the right way and find out what that is, And that's where the problem began, because how do you know what the right way to be religious is, or whose God claim is right? And it took me a while to then come across some atheist activists and some humanist activists and some kind of anti-religious people, and it took probably about 7 years, but I got to where I am now. um, do you think, could a God exist? Like, are you open to being are you open to the possibility that a God could exist, or have you made up your mind that a God can't exist?
There are some gods that people have created that I could definitively say they don't exist. Like when people make really specific claims about the Judeo-Christian God, I could easily say that those specific versions of that God don't exist. But that's just because they're making factual claims that we can check on.
No.
But if you go into the more illusory, like the guy that started everything, maybe.
Mhm.
I guess the best way I could say it in a really like soundbite kind of way is just saying, God totally could exist, but he probably doesn't.
um, because I think we spoke a couple months ago about this in an email. Like, I think you asked if I was still a believer. I mean, I haven't given up on it. I mean, maybe, that I don't think any religious claim is true, and if there is something, I don't think it cares about if your sex life and stuff like that. But I think there could be some type of spirit that set things, or now of course we're a long way away from proving that and compelling others to believe in it. But um, did you ever deal with a fear of hell or a fear of punishment or anything like that?
Nope.
No.
None of it. It was never enforced, and if it's this is one of the interesting things is you say like, oh, I believed this for such a long time, so I kind of thought it was true or something like that. If you're not brought up with that kind of thinking, it just isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't have a fear of hell because it was never forced on me.
It's interesting because when I talk to other, even like David Silverman, now he doesn't deal with that. But if you saw that interview, he said that he's known people who have been atheists for 25 years, and if they came out of a fundamentalist background, which obviously you didn't, but if they came out of a background that was serious into religion, they can still have that worry, even even as
that's what I'm talking about. Is when you're initially instilled as a child, it is imprinted on your brain. Like like only in recent years have we really dedicated a lot of time to child development. You can do some really awful things to children, even when you just suggest something to them. Like, it can really format the way that their brain will function for the rest of their lives. I think there's a clinic in England. I want to say England, but I could just somewhere in Europe that is actually a like rehabilitation clinic for people coming out of religion. You laugh, but it can actually be a debilitating disorder of having to deal with if you are like beaten for not believing in hell, then it will really mess you up.
I bet. I mean, and I think in America we've got that recovering from religion. I've looked into it. I haven't been able to get too much information on it yet, but I think there's like a hotline and even to help people who like their career was that they were a priest, but now they don't believe and they want to transition into another.
That's the clergy project.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That was brought on with Jerry DeWitt. I think I talked to him very briefly at a meeting once.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful man and probably the most upbeat person ever.
Oh yeah.
I think he still has a lot of the preacher in him.
Yeah. Now, what with your activism and with your channel and everything, what type of stereotypes about atheists do you want to confront and correct?
This is actually a thing that I will fully admit has to do with my age. I got into this being the hyper-aggressive, very angry kind of atheist, and I've only very recently realized that is an awful way to go about these sort of conversations. You can even look at my earlier videos. I'm basically yelling at a camera.
Uh-huh.
And I'm starting to realize recently that that is the image of atheists that we really have to stop.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's perfectly fine to be a firebrand, but still be compassionate. Like, It has a lot to do with where you base your emotions from. If you come into a conversation already angry at the person, then you are going to have an awful conversation. But if you come into a conversation understanding that they are talking with not only sincerity, but also they're coming into it. If you're talking to a really hardcore religious person, they're often coming into it desperately wanting to save your life.
Or your
You have to
soul, yeah.
understand that. And then you have to kind of come at it from that sort of angle and be like, there, I understand what you're thinking. The only objection I have is that it's factually wrong. So I want to know why you believe it, and I want to see if we can actually work on those reasons. Come at things. I want more atheists to do that. Because you can still be aggressive as hell, basically, but you can be way more effective.
That's very interesting. Do you think that a lot of religious people, with that said, do you think that a lot of religious people are well-intended?
I think most of them are. Like, I think most religious people have been basically trained from childhood to think that what they're doing, when they go up to someone and say, like, you're going to burn in hell, they're doing that to help them. And that's why for like an atheist, that's such a twisted way of thinking. Even to a more mild religious believer, that seems like offensive and crazy. But that's what they think, and we need to register that.
Well, that's very interesting because some atheist activists that I've met have said, obviously, no one says that all Christians are bad or whatever, but some think that it is a scam about money or
Do you know the phenomenon?
I
Like,
am not familiar with that actually.
here, I'll just say it for viewers.
Yeah.
A Poe is basically someone on the internet that is indistinguishable from somebody actually making a ridiculous claim.
Oh.
Like they purposefully act ridiculous, but you can't tell the difference because the people that are sincere about it are just as crazy sounding. And it's basically by definition, it's impossible for an observer to tell. So I try to go into conversations assuming the person is being genuine.
Okay.
So you can go like the Ray Comforts, the like Kirk Camerons, those sort of people. They could be all lying to make money, or they could be genuine. To me, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it probably
Because
has the same effect.
it's like the only way that they have power and money is because of people listening to what they have to say and believing them. So if you can address their points and show the world that they're just wrong, then they'll lose all of their money and power and have to do something productive.
Do you think that churches and religious groups should have to pay taxes on the money that they get?
Certainly. It's the same. It's difficult because there are churches that are genuine, like charitable organizations. But even charitable organizations have to, most of the time, report their income to at least say, like, we're doing this for charitable reasons. It's not going into our pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Most churches don't even have to do that. And
Yeah.
that's just ridiculous. Like, this is money being given freely, and most of the time it's because they believe it's being put to a good place, but then it goes into people's pockets. That's a mission of fraud. So that's not good. So I think it would be good if it's at least tracked the same way that all money is. And I don't think that they should be special in the sense that like their land is tax-free. I don't understand what the point of that is. But basically, if you can prove that they're a charity, then they're a charity. They just happen to be a charity with a religious like connotation. Whatever.
Yeah. Now, I want to move on to the topic of the possibility of there being an afterlife. Obviously, this is a big topic with religion. Some people will say they're going to heaven or you're going to hell. They can use it as an incentive or as a disincentive. And some atheists say for better or for worse, there is no afterlife. Some of them think it's better, because you're only accountable in this life and there's no chance you're going to burn or whatever. I've had some atheists say that they'd like to live forever. They just don't see the evidence. But would it be better if there was an afterlife? Say you and I have a friend of ours, another college student, and he's a nice guy, and He happens to get some disease and pass away. I mean, would it be better? Let's say scientists said, there's a possibility that when we die, we're working on looking at it, but when we die, we might go to some nice place and we're comfortable. Like, would that be better than, I guess just being dead?
You asked a question that's actually several different questions. Like, there's the idea that would it be better for people that are suffering? Maybe. But does that mean they can get sick in that afterlife and just die again?
Huh.
There's also the idea that if people will just get into a comfortable afterlife anyway, then all medical science is worthless. Let's just stop doing that and start just making our life like jetpacks and knife battles for everybody.
That's it. That's interesting. I never thought about that.
That's what I'm here for.
What about
But no, but then there's also the idea that of the incentivation. I don't like the idea that this life is just a doormat. That's a common like atheist thing. Is just like if there is an eternal afterlife, then this life right now is absolutely worthless. What you should be doing is taking the most high risk activities possible so you can die as quickly as possible. But most people, especially religious people, it seems, don't do that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because the religious idea of an afterlife is just a crutch to deal with the life you're already in. And they don't actually think that it's a literal place you literally go. It's just you think about the afterlife and it's a comfort feeling you get like wash over your body. Because if you think about it for any length of time, it's an awful, awful idea. Like, if you're in there's like, I think Thunderfoot on YouTube made a wonderful video about this. It's like, imagine the most resplendent awesomeness you can possibly think of. You have that for 1,000,000 years, and then 1,000,000 more years, and then 1,000,000 more years, and then 1,000,000 more years, and that's just the beginning. Like, nothing can be enjoyable for that long.
How about when someone is like a bad person? I usually bring up a couple examples, but obviously if we study history, there are criminals who have gotten away with a crime. There many murderers. The statistics show a lot of time, maybe only half of the murders that committed, the defendant actually goes to trial. So a lot of people get away with a lot of stuff. And would it be better if there was, I don't mean to ask the same question, but does a part of you ever wish there was some type, maybe not a hell for eternity, but like if we died and there's an afterlife, would it be better if there was some adequate punishment? Say I broke into your apartment and stole $1,000 and you never caught me, but maybe thinking that maybe if there was a possibility I would have to pay for it later. Like, is there a part of that that's,
I actually have the exact opposite feeling. When I see somebody commit a crime, I see that as a failure of our society to help that person. The person that committed the crime. Like, I don't understand why anyone wants to see someone that commits a crime be punished. Like, who does that help? It doesn't dissuade the person from committing the crime because they already did it. And it doesn't make the crime go away. I think like in the same way that the afterlife idea can make people get awash with a feeling of calm or whatever, the same thing has been trained into us with the idea of eternal punishment and punishment in general. Like, I am much more excited and much more happy about our development in psychology to deal with criminal behavior before it even starts. Yeah. So like if there's a murderer around and they do end up murdering someone, that's two people that just are now going to be suffering. Well, one of them's dead, but the person that's still alive is going to be suffering. And so is that victim's family.
Two people that have experienced loss is what you mean, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a weird emotion because it's not necessarily like the murderer is feeling loss, but there is a reason that they got to that position where they felt the only thing they can do is murder somebody. And I want to figure what those things are and prevent it from happening again and help that person to make sure they never do it again.
And that it doesn't happen in future generations and everything, right? No, I like that too.
This is why like capital punishment is the last possible resort to me, And the only reason we do it is because we suck at understanding criminals and we can't help them any other way. The only thing we can do is prevent them from hurting other people. It's basically like you're an angry parent who's really bad at being a parent. And instead of teaching your child not to keep biting your sister or something, or biting their sister, you just slap them around for a while and put them in the closet. Like, what does that do? It doesn't teach anyone anything. All it does is put a barrier on the problem.
That's true. That's true. I'm going to jump ahead to another. This is kind of on the topic of the possibility of an afterlife. You might have already answered it with what you said, but of course, I live right outside New York City, and September 11th was a very big event. I'm sure it was for you as well. And we started to talk a lot about how the suicide bombers.
I was 11.
But the suicide bombers thought that they were going to get like virgins in heaven. You remember, or I forget, like at least, and of course I didn't know them, but supposedly some Muslim suicide bombers think that if they do a terrorist act, they're going to get like 72 virgins or whatever it is. And the first person who I knew who was an atheist used to say, the joke's on them because nothing happens when you die. They don't even get a chance to be disappointed. And the question I usually would ask him, and I'm going to ask you, does a part of you wish that somehow they could be disappointed? Whether that means that there's a different kind of an afterlife, or
it's like they're dead. Like they lost out at living. Like they literally threw away their lives for a purposeful-less goal.
But did they ever realize? Like, do you wish they could realize?
No, they don't realize because they're dead. But
that's the issue, though.
Realized.
Like, maybe like, even if there was only like an hour of an afterlife, I think that's what the guy, Drew in Texas said. He's like, he says he wishes that there was at least an afterlife for like a couple minutes so he could know that he was right. And do you wish that they could?
I mean, like it would certainly be interesting. Like as a curious person, I would like to know what it would be like to basically see my body as I drift away or whatever, as my brain fully disintegrates. But it doesn't matter what I want. Like I'm concerned with what actually happens.
When we talk about the future, do you think things are getting better or worse? Now, obviously, like, sometimes it seems that things are getting better, because there do seem to be more, we seem to be progressing, there's more information, there are more atheist activists and humanists and all that. But at the same time, there also, when I turn on the TV, there's a lot of, especially in the Muslim world, I usually talk about Iran and Pakistan, etc. There seem to be hundreds of millions of people that are very intolerant. I mean, so do you think things are getting better or worse?
Significantly better.
Oh, that's good.
And the reason, like, I don't have cable, and I'm really happy that I don't. It's because, like, we have a 24-hour news cycle, and we have sensationalist newscasters. Or news stations, rather. Like, if you look at the statistics, murder and, like, sexual assault are on an all-time low in this country. Like, it's never been this good to live in this country. But you will never, ever hear about that.
No, it's interesting because I was a psychology major in my undergrad, and I remember when I studied the violence courses, they talked about that. Like, murder statistically is very low, but it's on the news, so you think you live in like this violent world. No,
and even more than that, there's a thing called like it's something with an F. It's like the Flynn effect. Children are getting smarter every generation, like markedly smarter every generation, and you don't hear about that. All you hear about is ADHD and all this other nonsense. Also, secularism, and I'm saying secularism as opposed to atheism, is also on the rise in this country, which is fantastic. Like, personally, I think it would be great if everyone believed things for really solid reasons. But at the very least, as long as we can agree to keep our personal beliefs out of the government, that's cool. I can live with that.
Oh, that's cool, yeah.
So like the secularism and the rise of the nuns, like the people that are non-affiliate kind of religious people, including atheists and agnostics and everything else that couldn't be strictly identified, that's the largest growing group in the world. And that's pretty good. So I think in those like social strata, kind of social issues, we're doing pretty good. Technology-wise, we're basically magicians compared to people from 50 years ago. So that's pretty fantastic. In my lifetime, we've gone through 3 different types of storage media.
Oh, wow.
So technology is just exploding.
When people, you've talked about the crazy stuff in the Bible. I've seen some of your videos, but I've I've dealt with it where obviously we've all heard and dealt with people who will accredit their high moral character with the Bible. They'll say like, I'm going to wait until I get married to have sex because it's in the Bible, and I'm going to do the right thing because of the Bible, and I'm going to do this good thing because of the Bible. But obviously we all know, at least us that study the Bible, we know the truth about the Bible, that there is murder and slavery and a lot of bad things. Why do you think people will accredit their positive, their high moral actions with the Bible?
I think part of it has to do with they're told to, that if it's good, it's in the Bible, so you have to say that. But at the same time, I think people that are questioning their beliefs or questioning their particular religion have to give it more credit than it deserves to give it legitimacy. And I think like a lot of pastors and priests are directly telling their congregation to think that way. Because, like, obviously we don't get our morals from the Bible. The sheer fact you and I can have a conversation on what is moral and what isn't means we don't get it from the Bible. If we got it from the Bible, we would think everything in the Bible is just fantastic. But we don't.
What really got me, as I kind of talked earlier, one of the things that kind of got my attention and got me thinking about the topic is when people take offense when you disagree with their religious beliefs. Like, I had one of the first people I met that got me thinking. I had a coworker that, she was one of the first people to tell me, you're not praying the right way, and, this is what God wants, and everything. And she would talk about stuff. I usually use the example of Noah's flood, but she would talk also about the Tower of Babel and Adam and Eve, and she would talk about these things as if they were literal events that we could confirm had happened. And sometimes I would say, well, maybe that didn't happen. Maybe there wasn't a worldwide flood. And she would kind of shout back with threats and anger. And so the question is, why do people with religious beliefs, if you say, well, maybe I disagree with that, why do you think they come back with like anger and hostility?
It's equivalent to saying you are a liar.
Oh, wow.
Like if people, because people, especially if it's a religious idea or if it's a heavily ingrained cultural identity, it is who they are to them. So if I said, I don't like, I don't know, the picture you have behind you, I don't even know what that is, but it doesn't matter. You can kind of be like, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
I like it, so screw you. And I'd be like, all right, fair enough. But if I said, I don't like your face, you'd just be like, well, that was rude.
Yeah.
But now, if I said, I don't think you have a good character.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Then you're just kind of like, well, damn, I don't think I want to talk to you anymore. And that's kind of the level that religion is to a lot of people. By even questioning a fringe aspect that's obviously a story, you're basically questioning the framework by which they develop part of their identity.
And you kind of
that's a punch in the face for a lot of people. And that's why you can't go about it that way. If you have these sort of conversations with people, you really have to go why do you believe this? Because if you even consider that the Bible is true, you've already lost the conversation, basically. So you just have to go into their personal reasons for believing in something and just talk about it, because that's all that really matters. And you can believe in anything. People believe in a lot of silly ideas, but they do it for reasons that are important to them, and that's what you need to be concerned about.
It's interesting because I talked to in my last interview. I talked about how scientists will will discuss things like there are competing theory. There's the Big Bang theory, and then there are theories that
Mhm.
that suggest something else, but no one's angry at each other. Like if you believe in the Big Bang and I believe in a different thing, it's not going to be an issue. Um, how do you go? I mean, so you kind of addressed it
It's
earlier. Like, what's
I'm
your?
like Oh, I'm sorry. I think scientists have like this is not universal, and I have gotten offended when someone has said I was wrong in research I've done. So it's not like scientists are magic. But I think in general, scientists base it's kind of like their idea stands separate but then themselves and is supported on its own foundation. Like, I could be a liar and a con artist, but if I had a theory supported by demonstrable evidence, it doesn't matter who I am. That theory is still right.
Yeah. It would really.
So you have like M theory and string theory and Big Bang theory, and they're all colliding against each other. It doesn't matter. Whatever the evidence is what's going to win. It doesn't even matter who came up with the idea initially. The evidence is what's important. Like people all the time will kind of say like Charles Darwin was like into slavery and like a horrifying racist, and it's like I don't
Yeah, it
care.
doesn't change. It doesn't change the
Like
fact.
evolution is still accurate.
No, you're
He
right.
could be he could have like actively stabbed children and used their blood to write the original documents. It doesn't matter. It's still right.
Well, you're right. It doesn't change, right? And a lot of times that happens with religious people, and when two people are going head to head, they'll be like, "Well, Stalin was an atheist, and then this bad person was a
Yeah,
Christian. It
and you know
doesn't matter."
why? It's because the ideas don't stand separate on their own merit. They basically are only as valuable as how credible the initial people that wrote it are.
Oh wow.
And that's it. Like it doesn't stand on its own. So if you try to discredit a person making a religious claim, you can almost throw away the religious claim because it doesn't have any outside supporting evidence.
So
Because
for
normally if someone makes an opinion, you just go after the evidence and then you're fine. But if there is no evidence, then it's like, why are we even talking about this?
so perhaps we, well, of course, it goes back to the ad hominem. If I have my terminology correct, don't attack the person, attack the argument. It really surprised me
There's
though.
there's a misconception about the ad hominem argument. Telling someone that they are wrong or that they are actively lying is not an ad hominem attack. It's an accurate portrayal of the situation.
Well,
So, like, an ad hominem attack is when you try to discredit the person rather than discrediting their argument. But if you already discredited their argument and they're still talking, then it's not suggested. But you can say whatever you want and still be justified.
it was very surprising when I really started researching this and really reading the Bible and understanding and talking to people that a lot of the stories in the Bible, especially you get into Revelation, there's like dragons that knock stars out of the sky, and there are adults in their 40s and 50s that really believe it.
Mm.
And it just because see, okay, my family is Catholic, and I talk to Catholic priests a lot. And the Catholic Church kind of in a tough situation where they are kind of accepting evolution, and they're kind of trying to like jump on the bandwagon a little and or maybe try to like figure out how well when they said that this happened with the earth, it maybe scientifically it was this, but it's all the people knew at the time. Like they're trying to come up with explanations, so at least they don't take it literally. But there are people that take stuff literally, that I mean, some crazy story in the Bible, that like Noah's Ark is the one I usually use, but I mean, there's even like devils coming out and battles between
Mm.
devils and angels. Like I'm talking 40 and 50-year-olds that believe that literally happened, and that really surprised me. I don't know. I mean,
When you are trained from the cradle to think that something is true, it like I don't want to like make the connection completely, but it's a lot like being a racist.
no, okay,
Like
yeah.
you are trained from birth to think that another race is just worse than you. And no matter how much evidence is given to you, it doesn't matter because it still has to be filtered through this idea. Like that's why a lot of religious people totally accept evolution, but they say that God is doing it, like he's fiddling with the gears or put it in motion initially, because God has to still be there. He just has to be. So it doesn't matter what you have to do to basically force God into the picture, but you're going to because God has to still be there.
Um, I think I brought this up on the phone, but in Tajikistan, which is a country in East Asia, kind of north of Afghanistan, they had a very interesting situation. The government was kind of secularist, but there were a lot of fundamental Muslims in the country, and the government has actually put a lot of restrictions on religion. I think that I think it's like 15. They don't want kids to go to mosque until a certain age, and they don't want girls wearing the Muslim scarves until like age 17 or 18. And they actually made it that you're not allowed to display you're not allowed to have like a billboard saying, praise Allah or whatever. So they put a lot of restrictions on religion. The question is like, what's your take on that? You think that was the right thing to do, or?
It's a difficult situation because I think you need to have some regulation. Basically, you can't put on a billboard, kill all gay people. Like, obviously you can't do that, and no one would let you do that. But at the same time, I think in a free society, like I don't know how their government works, you kind of have to let people come to their own conclusions eventually. And then most people, when they have the information, just over generations, just progress away from religion anyway. So, and actually, probably the horrible irony is the more you force someone to do something, they'll just do the opposite. Like, I'm not going to be surprised at all if in this country, if in Tajikistan, is it?
Tajikistan?
Tajikistan, if there's just going to be an underground, super orthodox Muslim community.
I
of course there's going to be, because if you force someone to change, they're not going to. There has to be a generation of children with slightly more lazy parents who will just be like, yeah, I just don't believe it anymore. Because it wasn't ingrained as a kid, and if it's not ingrained as a kid, you're not going to believe it. Like, if you choose not to do the whole, like, female get-up thing until you're, like, 18, most people aren't going to do it. My go-to thing is circumcision. If you let a boy choose at 18 to get circumcised, they're not going to do it. I think the minority that will, then okay, they can make that choice now. It's their right to. And I think that's like in the US, I think it would be reasonable, even if it's not necessarily advisable, to like put restrictions on how you indoctrinate children. But it's one of those things that I would love it to happen, but it's impossible to do. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you tell someone they can't raise their child religious, but then say that you could be like a Republican? Like, or bring them to a football game. Like, these are all forcing ideas into the child, but which ones are bad? Like,
well, have you thought
you can't do thought policing. Once you start doing thought policing, we're going down a bad road.
Have you thought it would be good to make it that you can't teach someone religion until they're 21?
How could we possibly do that?
If there was a way, like...
The only ways I could conceive of it are things I would never want to have happen. No. I would much rather us develop a society in which no one would have to turn to religion. Like, have community centers everywhere so we get that social need that all people have. Have clubs in schools where people kind of get their interests. Show atheists in public so they know not believing this stuff is not a big deal. Have education and healthcare for everybody. Like, if we have a healthy society, it'll get less religious. That's just what happens in general.
That's interesting. In New Jersey, we had an interesting situation. Well, I mean, you're not even that far away, maybe you heard, but the Libertarian Party wanted to legalize prostitution. They had a couple reasons. First of all, a lot of times the prostitutes here get beat up and they're kind of hiding from the police. And we've actually had some unfortunately get killed. And they also debated whether it was really a crime and if we had it in like a safe place, maybe it would be better. And if the girls were to get beat up, they could go to the cops, just like any other profession. So they had this idea to legalize it, and they kind of came forward, but the religious right kind of came up and said, oh, you know, it's offending God, it's unholy, it's this, it's that, and they really had their influence, and it went nowhere. So the question is, when we're facing tough decisions like that, what would be, and it's not an easy decision, but what would be your criteria? Like, should we think about what God wants? And what would be your criteria for making a tough decision?
It's when someone says, should we do what God wants, what you're really saying is, should we do what the current religious majority says we should do? Because God's not going to say anything. If it even exists, it's not going to say anything. It never does. So it's whatever the particular interpretation of the day is. But I digress. I think there's like a lemon test when it comes to making laws in Congress. Like, you're not allowed to do anything if there's only a religious reason or benefit. Like, it is requirement to have a secular reason, and that's essentially my own criteria. If you have religious justification for things, okay, I can be inspired by religious doctrines also. Like, it's a book written by people, so I can be inspired by it just like any other book. And I'm sure that living in a Christian society, a bunch of those ideas have seeped into my brain, even if I don't want them to. So the idea, like, that's fine, but you still need to have a secular reason for basically making any decision. So for this prostitution example, like, we would have to come up with a reason that it's a bad idea to not let people do this particular action. Like, does it harm society in general? Does it actually raise the crime rate? Do we have other countries you can compare this to? How did they do it? Did it work there? Can we even pull this off? Like, those are the kind of questions we should be asking. Not, like, this ridiculous thing is, what does God have to say about it? We had to figure, we're the ones that live here. We had to figure out if it works for us. Personally, I have some, like, apprehension about legalizing prostitution, because most places it's tried to be legalized, it actually ends up disastrously and actually raises the crime rate in human trafficking. But that could be because it's done wrong. Yeah. Like, I don't think I could actually say to someone, you do not have the right to use your body the way that you want to. I can't really justify that language. So I might, like, even if I don't personally like the idea, if it became legal, I think I would have to support it. Because I can't really say no.
I think Nevada has it set up the right way. They make them go through classes. They make them get disease checked every week, and they kind of monitor them to make sure that, and you have to sign up for it.
But that's the issue, though, is you can have, like, basically pimps that can now hide behind laws as opposed to hide from the law.
Oh, yeah.
So it's weird, and it's a really touchy subject, and the idea of it increasing human trafficking is terrifying. Yeah. So I don't want that to happen at all. I'd actually have the same opinion as before, is if we raise societal standards, chances are we kind of have a less need for prostitution.
That's a good point.
Like, or rather, less women or men, for that matter, would feel they need to go into prostitution to make money. They could just be like, I have a free college tuition, so I'll just go learn that trade I never thought I could afford before. But even so, if there are just some people that just really dig having sex with strangers and they want to do it for money, I can't necessarily justify forbidding that particular decision. I would give a lot of reasons not to do it, but I can't justify saying that you definitely can't.
Now, do you have any friends that are religious? Is that an issue?
I definitely have friends who are religious, but they know about me.
How do they not?
So they don't, it's either it doesn't really come up, because it's not really that important in my day-to-day conversation. Because, like, a lot of my friends that I hang out with, what we talk about is video games and school, mostly. Because what the hell else are college kids going to talk about? I'm a horrible nerd.
Are Christian nations more tolerant of atheism?
No.
Really?
What?
No?
Christian nations being tolerant of atheists.
Well, when compared to the rest of the world, so is America, well, right, I mean, think of like nations
Oh,
such
okay. Oh, we're not a Christian nation.
okay, well, what would be an example of a
I think
Christian
there's
nation?
some that would definitely qualify as Christian nations. They have basically theocracies. And these are countries where if you're gay, you die.
Oh, well.
Don't even get me started on what happens to you when you're an atheist.
But okay, right, I see what you mean. Are nations that are majority Christian more tolerant of atheism? And I guess the answer could still be no.
The United States of Western countries is by far the most religiously crazy. I think we're somewhere between 70 and 80% Christian.
Right, which one could argue, right, yeah.
Well, there's a difference between having a lot of Christians and being a Christian nation. One has religion written into the government. The other one just has a lot of people that share a belief system. So anyway, or what is it? Atheists are less trusted than rapists.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there was a Pew survey, I believe, I think in 2010, that basically was ranking whether or not you would vote for somebody depending on a whole bunch of different criteria. If you were a Muslim, if you were a different type of Christian, if you were gay, if you were a woman, if you're an atheist, atheists are ranked below rapists.
So how do you go about, like, do you have any ideas as to how you would go about change, like how atheist groups should try to change that? How
show we're not show we're more trustworthy than rapists.
It's very interesting.
Project a positive image of atheism. It's not that hard.
All right.
Like, I implore you, my atheist comrades. Terrible choice of words. My atheist friends. We can do better. If we're basically seen as nothing but the angry people that constantly complain, then that's all we're going to be seen as. There's a guy, I'm so embarrassed I forgot his name, Connor Robertson, who is doing a fantastic outreach program in Ghana, I believe next summer. And it is a non-theistic, basically atheistic movement to go out and help people who are basically dealing with the fallout of witch superstitions. Mm-hmm. There are women that basically are ostracized from their communities and forced to live on magic land that sap their magic powers. At least they stay alive. In other parts of the country, they're just killed.
It zapped their magic powers. Wow.
But in by a complete coincidence, this also happens to be like the least developed and most filled with turmoil part of the country. Absolutely. So, surprise, surprise. And he's doing that. That's a fantastic image for atheists. He didn't do it at all with that direct intention initially, but it's just a fantastic side effect. Showing that being religious isn't even close to a prerequisite for being a nice person.
That's good. That's good. Do you think you talked before about brainwashing, and I think David Silverman told me that religion is, a lot of times it's about who brainwashed you and when. Do you think that we choose what we believe, or is it a result of something?
You talked with Matt Dillahunty before, and I actually heard his explanation for this was fantastic. We do not choose what we believe. We are compelled to believe based off of our experiences and based off the evidence. So I hope Matt Dillahunty said that, otherwise I'll be embarrassed.
Probably. It sounds like something he would say. He usually has the best answer.
He's done this a while. But that's an actually really astute observation. Because it's not like if I say, I'm trying to think of a really good example. If I'm trying to look at a particular colored wall or something, like my walls are a disgusting yellow color, the reason I think that is because I'm used to that color and associating it with the color yellow. Like, it's not that I'm making a conscious decision to go that yellow. I'm compelled to call it yellow because of my past experiences. That's a really like crappy like
Yeah.
example.
Well, because
It's kind of the same way with like a child's belief in Santa Claus is probably a much better example. Just forget I talked about color. Last 2 minutes didn't happen. But it's the idea that children will believe in a Santa Claus until they're given a reason not to believe it. It's not like you can even like if you ask them, they'll basically say like because presidents show up. What are you, an idiot? Like they don't have a really justifiable reason, but they really believe it because they're compelled to based off of what they've been told.
what's interesting though, I got the impression sometimes that I thought people were trying to also trying to make themselves believe, and I do think some
Uh,
atheist activists have talked about that, like the reason that they proselytize others and try to convince others. Part of them is also trying to maybe convince themselves. I don't
that
know.
is the important part. Is I think like if you talk to anybody, this has actually been on Matt's show a couple of times. If they go through these like painfully convoluted arguments, like the ontological argument, or like all these other like really silly explanations, and then like someone will just follow up with, "Is that what made you believe in the God?"
Mhm.
And they're like, "No, of course not." It's they kind. I think a lot of these new agey arguments are justification
Yeah.
for people to feel better about what they feel compelled to believe for completely other reasons. It's like, oh, now my belief in God is totally justified based off of science and logic and all this other stuff. But that's not why most people have ever become religious. Most people become religious because of their childhood.
Mhm.
All the
Yeah.
follow-up stuff is the stuff that atheist people have to deal with.
Um, do you have any opinions about Madeline Marie O'Hare? Were you familiar with her?
I wasn't alive when she died, I think.
But I mean, did you see her on like have you seen like any clips
I
about?
saw one of her speeches, and I was just blown away. Wait, now I have to make sure we're talking about the same person. Is this the person that started American Atheists?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And
Okay, yeah.
she was in
She
Texas.
was a very eloquent speaker, and we needed her.
Yeah. But I mean, did you think her methods were right though? Because she was a little confrontational and to say
It's almost like the first wave or the first and second wave of feminism. Those were also largely confrontational, and sometimes you need
yeah,
that.
to start with.
Sometimes you need people to get in your face and then have an actual conversation.
It's interesting.
And I think that was very necessary. I understand that the groups like American Atheists are confrontational, and I'm glad they are because somebody has to be. Even though they don't even come at it necessarily as an attacking force, they're still aggressive, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Are there any other figures, maybe like a David Hume or whoever? Like, are there any other figures that you admired and would suggest people, reading about or whatever?
Sure. Let's see. All of the Four Horsemen, like they're all brilliant and fantastic. I just have a personal love of Hitchens. I love his sardonic wit. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, it
Uh,
sucks. I won't be able to have him on. I do want to
if
get
you
going.
had, if you somehow got him on, that would be crazy. But Aaron Ra is pretty fantastic.
R and
Mostly a YouTuber, but he's also, I think, the Texas director of American Atheists.
right. Yes, he is.
The atheist experience is pretty fantastic. JT Eberhardt is he's less known, but I think he writes on Pathos, and he's pretty active. He's very good and brutally honest, which is very very refreshing sometimes. Uh, Sam Harris, he's one of the Four Horsemen. He just
Yeah.
came out with a new book that was actually very like uplifting. It's like Wake Up. I think it's the title of the book. I have it over there somewhere.
Yeah, that's
And
yeah.
probably a huge list more. If you want to just do YouTube, Thunderfoot is great.
And who does he debate? He debates the banana sandwich show or something. I forget. Right? Do I have that right or no?
There's the Magic Sandwich podcast is a different thing.
Okay.
Skeptic Fence is also a show that's pretty good. Uh, Deterlucem, that's some guy. He has a YouTube channel that everyone should check out.
Oh, does he? He's not too bad and everything. What do you think about when the people like a Ken Miller, and because there are scientists who are religious, there are people who know about evolution, know everything we can know or should know. They seem to even understand the Big Bang and astronomy, but they end up religious. Do you have any opinions on that?
They are simultaneously a fantastic ally and probably the worst hindrance. Like, they're giving justification for a bunch of crazy people, but at the same time, they are a wonderful bridge to understanding how people can actually make that kind of decision. Because clearly they're not believing based completely off of the evidence, because, like, they clash basically directly with each other. But then they found some way to basically reconcile both their beliefs and their religion. So that's fascinating, and it's useful to understand why. But it's still like the justification to crazy people, and just like, you want to shake these people. Just like, you're almost there.
Push them from behind, right? Yeah.
But it's like, some of them have been like the most remarkable scientists ever. And the way I tend to call it is, they might draw inspiration from their religion, but they do science despite their religion, not because of it. Like,
Yeah.
if you believe in a religion that has creationism in it, you're not believing in evolution accurately.
Right.
Or that's not actually true. You're not actually believing that if you also trust evolution. You can't do both things.
So I appreciate you coming on. It's great to finally get you. I will call you next time I'm in Philly. But before I go, I usually end with asking, did you have any questions for me?
How far do you expect this to go? Like, you've already gotten some pretty like highbrow people on this show.
Well, I actually I want to continue to get as many. I want to keep climbing the ladder. I want to get Penn Jillette. I want to get Bill Maher, who actually does not live very far away from me. So maybe I'll knock on his door one day. I want to get Seth MacFarlane. And really like Sam Harris, who you mentioned. I'd like to give it a shot. I mean, most of the people who I've tried to get on the program or to get on the program, my channel, have been very friendly. As you saw, I mean, I've had, Matt Dillahunty, David Silverman, Aaron Ra, they all said yes. And, I mean, believe it or not, the only people that I can't get on are religious people. I won't mention any names, but some of the people that are scientists and religious that we talked about, and some of the people who are just all out religious, they refuse. So the atheists are usually more friendly about it. And I would also, I visit England maybe once every 2 to 3 years. I'm going to use the word try, to get Richard Dawkins and a few others on as well. Maybe, I mean, I'm going to give it a shot. And I think that would be really awesome,
Great.
yeah, and I mean, but I tell people, it's not just, I mean, even if you're, like you have your channel, I appreciate having you on as well. It's good to have these conversations.
What motivated you to start doing this?
It's been kind of probably really since about the year 2006, when I was 24, when I was your age. That is when I had people coming to me. I was going to a Catholic church, and religion was kind of I knew God was there, and if you pray, I was a basic religious person, but I ran into people who were of a certain brand of Christianity, and they were telling me, you're not, basically, if you're not a part of their belief, then you're going to burn in hell. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I did take a couple weeks to think, I better get right with God, and I better find out what that is. And then I started to think, well, what is right with God? And of course, I would talk to 20 different people who would have 20 different versions, but I couldn't make them understand that they're like, so they would say, this is what God wants. And I would try to say, but these other people say this. And they would say, well, they're wrong. And I would say, well, how do I know they're wrong? If I have 10 different people saying that their routine is what God wants, and I tried so hard to make people, how do I know which of you is right? And of course it's not like proving gravity where it was just their assertions. And then as time continued, I started to really, and eventually, and it took me about a year to get at peace with that, where, okay, they don't know what God wants, I'll figure it out. Or maybe, and I also think, and I ask, maybe God doesn't really care about that. Maybe there is a God first, and maybe it doesn't care about it, and all that stuff. Maybe it just wants you to live a good life. Some atheists have even said maybe God wants you to be an atheist. But eventually, as time went on, I came across, I started, I think in maybe 2010, I came across the atheist experience, and I really didn't know, I only had one atheist friend growing up, but I really didn't know that even that was an option, and I'm still not even, as I've said in videos, I'm not there yet. I haven't said, like, okay, I don't believe in God. I haven't said that yet. I respect all people who do, but I still might believe. I'm figuring it out. I really don't know. But, really, religious intolerance that I experienced, and how it's really become a mainstream topic, and my desire to be a positive part of it is a motivating factor.
All right, then. That thoroughly answered that question.
I hope I hope that was the answer you were looking for and everything.
No, that was very good.
All right, man. Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording. But
Can I plug my channel?
Oh, absolutely. You certainly may.
All right, everyone. Deterlucem on YouTube. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. Come and post anything you'd like me to debunk or discuss. All right. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. It was great. All right.